that learning process with them.
Are there any, we love to focus on some of the lessons you can learn from the don'ts, because you have do's and don'ts on the show. Are there any specific examples, without incriminating yourself or dropping anyone's name in the shirts, that you can think of, or classical behaviors that you should avoid if you want to be a leader?
Yeah, don't ignore those around you, and don't assume you know more than they do. Probably the two most obvious ones that spring to mind off the top of my head. I can't remember who said it. I think it's attributed to Steve Jobs. Aim is to recruit people who are better and cleverer than me, or words to that effect. I think the other thing that when it comes to leadership there, the phrase of leadership by vulnerability, I think is a really critical one that I personally feel passionately about. Is we don't all have all the skills. I know what I believe my strengths are, and I also know to some extent what my weaknesses are. So if I'm working in a team environment, I'm looking to people who can fill those gaps in my weaknesses and do that stuff better than I can.
Yeah.
And then work with them.
And just an observation on my side, Al, around high-performing teams. We hear this a lot, and I was on a Q&A forum a couple of weeks ago, and it was a bit of a buzzword. And so, my first question is probably, what's your definition of a high-performing team? And secondly, it's probably a bit of a scenario where maybe you're or an organization that has a low-performing team. How do you deal with that and turning them around? I'd love to hear your insights or tips.
I guess the answer to the first bit of the question is maybe slightly controversial. I'm not so sure there is such a thing as a high-performing team.
I happen to agree with you. Yeah.
I think it comes back to the self-awareness thing. Is what is it that you can help individuals see and show them in terms of the way that they're operating, that allows them to take that journey themselves and then guide them along that journey. So as a consultancy, that's our job anyway. We're not there to deliver ultimately the projects or the programs or the organizations. We're there to help facilitate and catalyze and guide those individuals and those teams and coach and mentor along that journey. So I think the understanding of how low performing teams can change, it's got to start with a self-awareness and a self-reflection.
Yeah, and I happen to agree with those sentiments. It's a difficult conversation, as you mentioned earlier in the podcast, that a lot of the stuff around what we talk about is intangible, and thus some of the challenges we get put on, particularly by executives, is they want a return, right? You're putting all this emphasis on leadership and those emergent leaders we talked about, those technically orientated. Is there a silver bullet to education or training for emerging leaders? I mean, how do we get these? Because obviously these technical guys, they've obviously got some talent, guys and girls, and getting them into a position where at least they're capable, and they have all those facets along that triangle that at least allows them to practice the skill. Because obviously a skill, it takes time, doesn't it, and repetition. But is there a way to do that easily?
I think there is to some extent, and I think it's back to environment. I think there's the ability to create an environment of psychological safety for developing leaders, to allow people to make mistakes, to allow people to try different ways of working. I think you can train management, but I think you have to learn leadership, and learning is in this case very much more around learning through experience and doing. Rather than sitting and reading a book or being on a course. So it requires the environment to be created around you and above you. So back to your point about managers and leaders above you, the right empowerment and the right environment to allow you to go and try things, and learn to develop your own style, I think is perhaps the best place I can sort of best way I can answer that question.
You talk about learning, and where do you, we love to ask this question because we love where people get the inspiration from. Where do you get yours from? Is it, perhaps this podcast only that you listen to and you grab all your inspiration from it? Or, are there books out there that you'd recommend? Are there other podcasts? Are there, I don't know, where do you get it from? Is it chatting to other leaders in the industry?
Yeah, all of the above, I think. I get a lot of inspiration from my colleagues. I'm very lucky to be part of a network now, which is built up from people all vastly experienced, but vastly experienced in very different things. So part of our wider team, we have trainers, we have behavioral psychologists, we have behavioralists, we have program managers, we have business development guys, and actually, just amongst our core team, we have a really thirst for the knowledge, insight, and sharing that. So one of my favorite, I mentioned Goldman already, Daniel Goldman. My other favorite person to go to for reference and inspiration is Simon Sinek. And his concept of start with why and find your why. And I quite often use that and use some of his find your why videos in some of our workshops. So I always find that that's kind of a place to go, is very, very inspirational. But there's some really good stuff on Harvard Business Review. But there's one specific source. I think it's just being aware of what's out there and reading stuff that, even if you don't agree with it, it gives you the ability to think about it and challenge your own thinking. So I don't think there's a source of this is all the right answers and I'm going to go and read that or go and watch that. I think it's about being able to challenge yourself and challenge your own thinking as well.
Yeah, we spoke about previous podcasts about how you learn through debate, about constructive debating, and I like that. I mean, in your bio, we spoke about how you thrive on challenge and change, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's quite a significant statement, because a lot of people try and veer away from challenge and change. People like their comfort zone. But I think what Val said earlier is, I think as well as the sort of the next generation knowing what they want to do, far more than I guess I did in my generation growing up. They also, I think they're more open to challenge and change than I guess the previous generations. So I guess my question is on challenge and change. Is there a certain way you should challenge and change and look for it, or just go about your business challenging everything and just embracing all sorts of change? Because the old saying is, change is as good as a holiday and challenge is great. But what are some of the insights you could give those that are going, I'm not sure how to challenge, I'm not sure how to go about changing things? Are this like sort of, is there another triangle that people can follow?
Oh yeah, no, I wish there was. Just something you said about the next generation. I think the other thing about the next generation that I've seen as well is they are more challenging of the environment around them as well. And I think the things that they're looking for, that new generation coming to the workforce now and starting to mature in the workforce is really quite specific about what it's looking for. And it's not just about the profitability and the money, it's about the environment and as in the work environment, also sustainability and carbon friendliness and those things. And I think that is and needs to, rightly so, drive the way organisations think. But to answer your other question about how to challenge and how to drive change, everyone's different, and some people have a real thirst for challenge, and I guess I put myself in that category, and that probably goes back to being in sixth form at school and being in the debating society and being the one that would always step up and challenge and debate against the argument if no one else turned up, even if I didn't agree with it. So but you put yourself in the other person's shoes and see that perspective and then see where they're coming from, I think is also quite healthy. Which perhaps leads me to my one joke of the podcast, which is, if you're going to challenge someone, always walk a mile in their shoes, because when you challenge them, you'll be a mile away and you'll have their shoes. How do people challenge? I think constructively, clearly, and I think that can be quite difficult to work out the right temperature to do that at. And again, it depends on the environment around you. There are certain, environments and cultures where challenge is not welcome, unfortunately. And again, that's back to leadership. The leaders should be able to create an open environment where not only are their own decisions and their own capabilities challenged, but they would welcome that and see that as a positive thing. we're not there in a lot of places. And I hope people that come through the system and start to see the value in constructive leadership will